225 million kilometers from Earth, or roughly 3 trillion McRibs for those counting in freedom units, hangs the red planet Mars. We've been there before. A lander touched down on the rust-coloured soil, sending back grainy, fragile images in the brief window we had before the signal cut out and never came back. But that was then. This time, we're sending one mission, but it won't stay that way for long. On arrival, it splits. A dedicated lander for the planet, for each of its 2 moons, and a communication satellite to hold orbit and keep the signal alive. No more silence, no more lost connection. Mars, Phobos, Deimos. The Father and his 2 moons. 3 worlds waiting. Hello everyone, Carnassa here, and before we look to conquer Mars later on in the episode, we have Zap 1 that is currently arriving at Ceres, the zonked asteroid probe which we launched a couple of episodes ago. A couple of episodes being a couple of years. Yes, it really has been that long. The first stage, when we encounter Ceres, fires flawlessly. However, when I get round to trying to use the solid kick stage to capture us into, you know, a nice Ceres orbit, no matter what I do, whenever I try and decouple, the game crashed. And actually, I put the game down for a bit and I sort of forgot about this mission. So unfortunately, we end up slingshotting right past Ceres this time. Not to worry though, it was only a multi-billion-dollar mission that was ruined by me being forgetful. Anyway, moving swiftly on, we're going to come now into the vehicle assembly building where we are going to work on the next exciting phase of the Earth Aeronautics and Space Administration. That's right, it is space station time. We have unlocked the first parts that we are going to need in order to build a station, and I'm going to show you me basically putting it together in the vehicle assembly building. This is going to be Jigsaw Station. As you may know, all of the missions in this series are named after Enter Shikari songs, and I thought Jigsaw sounded like a good fit for a space station, considering we're going to be putting it together in pieces. Now, the way that this station is actually going to work is it's all going to be launched on one rocket. We're not going to do multiple launches to assemble this. This is all going to be just launched on a pinnacle later on. Not in this episode, it will be in a future episode, because it's going to take a while to build and to get the technology that we do need in order to make this work. However, despite launching this space station in one go, there is going to be some orbital assembly required, because the way I want this space station to look, I want it to look somewhat akin to Skylab, you know, being the first major US space station that existed, and in order to fit something that sort of shape into a rocket fairing, well, it's just going to be nigh on impossible. So we are going to do a little bit of orbital maneuvering and a little bit of reassembly once we get this up into orbit. Anyway, whilst I'm messing around placing solar panels and the RCS on this space station, another key reason why we can't quite launch this episode is actually going to be the cost of this. Now, I do not want to be using the Gemini spacecraft forever, and one really expensive upgrade that I'm going to have to make in order to make use of this space station is moving over to Apollo Tech. And I really do want to get to Apollo Tech because sending 3 crew up is going to be absolutely fantastic. We've only been able to do 2 at a time at the moment, and really going into these future missions, that just isn't going to cut it. So a huge expense of this space station is going to be unlocking that Apollo technology, and the reason why we have to unlock that is, well, I'm actually going to be using the Apollo docking port. And unfortunately, the way that RP1 works, well, if you get the docking port, you have to basically buy the entire capsule, because, you know, you can't just have the docking port, and I mean, we do need the entire capsule if we are going to be using the Apollo dedicated docking ports. So yeah, we might as well bite the bullet and actually get on with that. It's something that I have needed to do for a while. I kind of cheaped out on the moon mission, not going Apollo, just sending over 2 crew, because realistically, I wouldn't have been able to beat history if I went for Apollo this run. Maybe in a future run I might be able to do that with a little bit better management. Anyway, you may have noticed me not long ago actually filling up these science experiments for this space station. This is something that is so easy to forget. Space stations have science, and I mean, coming from a long time RP1 player, space stations never had science. It was always just in the capsules, but this is something that has been introduced more recently. And I say more recently, I mean I was still filming this. This was filmed in October 2024, so it's probably been around for quite a while now. But with this science, well, we're going to need to supply this with food, oxygen, water, all of that good stuff that does keep our Kerbals alive. Now, part of the aim of this space station is going to be we are going to refuel it, not necessarily with fuel, but, you know, supplies. We are going to be sending up supply missions to keep our Kerbals fed and watered, as well as doing some crew rotation as well. And I've gone for a period of 70 days. I thought 2 months and a little bit of leeway would be a good number to try and aim for. It means we should be able to get the vast majority of that station science done, and I don't have to worry about constantly rotating my crew literally every 2 weeks, because that would get really boring really quickly. I probably wouldn't even show that, but it would just really make the series drag from my perspective. So yeah, 2 months to me sounds kind of nice, kind of a nice in-between that I think should do us quite well. And with the upgrade to the Apollo docking ports, Jigsaw Station is done. It's going to be mounted onto a Pinnacle 2 and launched in the next episode. A quick return to the Space Center now, where I'm going to put some of the applicants that I got from completing the moon mission into my research. An additional 250 researchers to bring us up to 3,000 in total. That will certainly help with unlocking tech a little bit faster. We're currently working towards lunar exploration era science, which will be nice. It means we can do more scientific experiments all over the solar system. But apart from that, there is just a little bit of administration to be done, and that is training up Cody Phillips and Thierry Petit for the next Void Colossus mission to the surface of the moon, as well as beginning Sir Knightley Wilson and Spine Hughes on Apollo proficiency training, because we are going to be unlocking the Apollo capsule soon, and we do want to be able to use it. And with that all done, it's time to launch Earthmap. On the 19th of February 1969, Earthmap launches from the Space Center. You may know that I am playing with ScanSat, even though it is highly recommended not to for RP1, and basically what this is going to do is put a satellite into a polar orbit so that we can get some lovely images of the Earth, because you know I quite like looking at them. It's also quite nice to be able to send a small payload to low Earth orbit, because it means we still have a use for the Thunderbolt launch vehicle, which is basically getting really old by this point. It was actually the first ever launch vehicle to launch a satellite to orbit in this series. Obviously it has come a long way since then, but it is nice that we are still using a somewhat upgraded version of our early designs. That being said, maybe it's not so good that we do use these old designs, because unfortunately for Earthmap 1, we do suffer a failure of the Larch A engine, the second stage of this rocket. And well, because of the performance loss, well, the margins for this mission were very tight anyway, and unfortunately it does mean that we are not going to be able to make it to orbit today. On the plus side, at least this is a relatively cheap rocket that we can produce, so it's not the worst of missions to fail. And because the mission is so cheap to make, it's only going to take us until the 27th of March before we have another attempt at scanning the Earth. In the meantime though, Shackleton XI is about to make its second approach to Mercury. There's not really an awful lot to say about this. We have flown past Mercury a couple of episodes ago with this exact same spacecraft. We just got lucky enough to fly by again. I did try and attempt to go for a third flyby by playing around with Principia and seeing if I could get something, but unfortunately it seems like we're not going to be able to with just the 324 meters per second of delta V that we have remaining. But we do get a little bit of extra science from the flyby, although it really is negligible. Still, some pretty stunning views as we pass. On the 19th of March 1969, the planets have aligned and we are ready to send Shackleton X to Mars. our most capable interplanetary mission yet. For we are not just going to go to Mars, we are going to conquer it. In record time as well. Due to the nature of this transfer window, we're actually going to arrive at Mars before the end of this year, roughly September, so you won't have to wait until the next episode to find out what actually happens. Because you know that intro bit, that was all fake footage, that wasn't really what happened. Yeah, watch till the end of the video to find out really what happens. And we have liftoff of a Pinnacle 2 rocket, only for the second time ever in this series. That's right, we've only launched one of these before. A couple of episodes ago, we launched VoidNet, which was our communications network around the moon. And I do have a little bit of a superstition about second launches, and maybe it is founded in the way that the game runs. In the first launch, when you're using all brand new engines, the test flight timer, is right at the beginning. However, the second launch, that tends to be where the failures happen. So let's see how this goes. So I mentioned earlier that this is the most capable interplanetary mission we have ever flown, and that is the reason why we are needing to launch this on top of a Pinnacle 2, which can take about 26 to 27 tons to low Earth orbit. It's quite a decent launch vehicle. The mission payload is around 25 tons, and a lot of that is actually the hydrolox that we need to propel to Mars. And then when we get to Mars, there is quite a lot of tonnage that we are bringing as well. And that is because we're not just going to be landing on Mars for this. No, there are multiple steps to this entire mission. And they include landing on both of Mars's moons. So Phobos and Deimos, we are going to attempt to land on each one of those. We're also going to attempt a landing on the surface of Mars. And finally, the last part of this mission is going to be a satellite that we keep in orbit of Mars that will be able to communicate with each of the 3 landers and then send back their data to Earth. So we don't run into any sort of worrying lack of communications, which is what happened the last time we sent something down to the surface. Back to the current mission at hand though, we have successfully made it to orbit, even if we did need to use the trans-Mars injection stage just a little bit to get us to the orbit that we so desired. I'm not entirely sure what happened there, maybe there was a performance loss somewhere along the way. Next step is plotting out our trajectory to Mars using the Principia maneuver planner. We are using Principia on this series because I like pain. That is quickly enough done, and I will say about Principia, once you get the hang of it, I do find it is actually sometimes a little bit easier to plot out maneuvers than the stock system, but it takes a little bit of time getting there. With the maneuver all planned out though, we fire up those 2 RL-10 engines for the second time and get some absolutely stunning views of Italy, Corsica and Sardinia as we fly over Europe whilst performing this burn. Thankfully, there are no failures with those RL-10s this time round, and that means we are on course to intercept Mars, with a few minor alterations to our trajectory that still need to be done. Now, before we move away from this mission, there is only one thing that it is really missing that would mean that we could tick off every single box for Mars. Maybe not for this series, but at least for now. And that is to send over a rover. We've not done that. That is definitely something that I will be planning on doing in the next transfer window though, in about 2 years. But that's quite some time away, and I hear we've still got some Earth to be mapping. Just 12 days later from the launch of Shackleton X, Earthmap number 2 is ready to be launched. As I said previously, the Thunderbolt really is quick to build up and roll out and launch. There have been absolutely no changes made to this design compared to the failure earlier on, purely because we suffered an engine failure. This design is tried and tested, it works, I know it works, so there's nothing really to change about this entire mission profile. So whilst we launch this, I do just kind of want to talk a little bit about my goals for ScanSat, because I do have some for this series, at least some that I would like to achieve. First one, and pretty obvious one, is mapping the entire Earth with every single ScanSat experiment that we have. That way when I'm doing operations around Earth, I've got some pretty pictures to look at whilst I plan the way that my Kerbals are going to perish in low Earth orbit. Well, hopefully that doesn't happen. The next one, and really I should have done a bit more of this before actually landing on the moon, is mapping the moon, because, it would be nice to have detailed maps of the surface before we attempt to send a crew down there. And that being said, I think think before we ever attempt a crewed Mars landing, we are definitely going to want to have maps of the entire surface of Mars. That is going to be some time in the future though, so we don't have to worry about that quite yet, but maybe in the next transfer window, as well as a rover, we can also send some more advanced satellites to get us some decent imagery. And finally, a lot of the closer celestial bodies, I want to say, I would also quite like maps of, so that being Venus, Mercury, which is going to be very difficult because it's hard to get an orbit of Mercury. Most of the Jovian moons also going to be quite challenging because you need a lot of delta V to get into orbit of one of those, and maybe also Ceres and Vesta. Obviously, we had a failed orbit of Ceres earlier on in this episode, and we are going to be attempting to get an orbit around Vesta slightly later on, which already does have some ScanSat equipment on it, so hopefully we can start ticking off that goal later on in this episode. Back to the mission at hand though. This time, Thunderbolt performs flawlessly, and we are able to get into a very nice polar orbit, exactly what we want in order to map the entire Earth. With the amount of experimentation we have on this satellite as well, it will provide a steady stream of science, which is going to really help in unlocking some new fancy technologies. Not that we're going to be able to get those for a while, because my research queue is really backing up now. Despite having 3,000 researchers under my employ, well, we just can't get that tech fast enough. So I did say that Thunderbolt performed flawlessly, but for the astute among you, you may have noticed that actually the first and second stage were firing the entire duration of the first stage. That was clearly a massive mess up on the staging on my behalf, but it's nice to know that even with that Gamma 8, or Larch 8 as the configuration is, burning for the entire duration of the lower stage, we were still able to get that satellite into orbit. It means that it is overbuilt for that mission, and that is a wonderful thing to have. With the science coming in from all sources though, we have enough tech points to go into research and development and pick up space shuttles, which is going to be a very exciting future endeavor. As well as that, we also pick up 76 to 80 Hydrolox engines, which is going to help with our launch vehicles later down the line. Earthmap is definitely doing its job though, and we have some beautiful renders of the Earth, which we can see here. Next up though is a quick visit back to Shackleton X, where we do need to perform a slight trajectory change, because trying to get a pinpoint accurate approach to Mars around Earth is really difficult. It's not too big of a burn, and we definitely have the Delta V available. And finally, the second Colossus rocket has been built. Now we just need to strap Cody Phillips and Thierry Petit on top and send it on its way. Well, they were supposed to be on top, but unfortunately they've ended up in the lander. But nothing a little bit of a crew transfer can't fix before we start this mission. On the 2nd of July 1969, we are ready to send a crew of 2 to the surface of the moon and hopefully return them safely back to Earth. A couple of weeks before Apollo did it in real life. Except that this isn't our first time, no, this is our second time. So we really did smash that Apollo historic goal. And actually thinking about it, maybe it would have made more sense to fly this mission in a couple of weeks' time and follow history. But that is future me thinking about this whilst recording this voiceover, and past me probably just thought, no, I want the funds, I want that contract done, let's just get them sent. On a beautiful midsummer's day, Void Colossus II lifts off from Launch Complex 39B from the Cape. Barely a cloud in sight gives unobstructed views to the vehicle as it makes its ascension towards space. The 2 crew on board, Cody Phillips and Thierry Petit, have an exciting adventure ahead of them, so long as everything goes according to plan. And we have had 1 successful moon mission already this series, but what about a second successful moon mission? And this lunar mission does have slightly more challenging parameters. That being, I have picked up a targeted landing contract for this mission. We're not just going to whack ourselves down anywhere on the moon, no, we have a few spots that we are going to try and reach. And I say a few, we only need to reach one of them, but we do have targets to aim for. and we have to be a kilometer away from them, which, given the size of the moon, that's actually quite a hard target to aim for. The delta V on the lander for this moon rocket really doesn't give that much margin for error, so we're gonna have to hope that nothing fails and that my piloting skill is good enough to land within a kilometer of one of those targets and then stay there for 2 days, which with Principia means that our orbiting module is going to be completely out of plane with us when we attempt to launch to rendezvous with it, actually then have enough delta V in the lander to perform that rendezvous, especially if we need to do some really crazy inclination changes, and then finally I have to be good enough to not kill them on the return journey, which is definitely something that I have done in an RP1 save before. RIP Ellen Cox, ECMS will live on in our hearts forever. Any explosions observed around the crew capsule during the launch of this mission are purely speculative and are definitely not anything to do with the fact that I decoupled the docking port nose cone accidentally at a time that I shouldn't have done. In all seriousness though, the explosion didn't actually do anything to the capsule here, thankfully, but that is definitely something that I'm going to have to look into the next launch of one of these vehicles. But we are able to make it to orbit with Void Colossus II with 3,422 meters per second of delta V remaining, and that is more than enough for our translunar injection. With the maneuver all plotted out, Mission Control gives Cody Phillips and Thierry Petit the go-ahead to relight those 7 RL-10 engines on the translunar injection stage and propel these 2 Kerbals not further than any Kerbals have gone before, because we have already sent Jeff Mr. Blue Lynn as well as George Edwards to the moon in the last episode. They're going pretty far away. It's, you know, Earth is going to be barely visible from the surface of the moon, where hopefully these 2 are going to be ending up. And the more we fly this mission, the more likely that is going to be a success, because all 7 RL-10s did ignite, and none of them have had any sort of performance loss. Although the way that this section of this mission is designed, if any of them were to fail, it wouldn't really be the end of the world. They are all slightly angled, much like the Saturn I second stage was, so if one of them fails, we still should be pretty much firing through the center of mass. It might just mean that our burn times take a little bit longer. But we don't have to worry about that this time, because everything was okay. Cody Phillips and Thierry Petit are absolutely over the moon, or should I say soon to be on the moon, because, you know, that's where we're going. And yeah. Moving swiftly on, they're not the only part of this mission that is very excited to be this far, because of course the Pacl adapter that holds the CSM has decided it wants to dance. It wants to break free of its bonds and really try its hardest to cause this mission to fail, possibly even killing 2 Kerbals in that attempt. But no, it doesn't break the CSM, or really actually any part of this mission. But what does happen is the lander goes flying off, and we are going to have to use an awful lot of our RCS fuel to correct this. Now, this had me slightly sweating, because there is not an awful lot of RCS fuel on both of these modules, both the lander and the CSM. They really could do with having more, and I think that is a change that I make after this mission. And yes, because of the lack of that fuel, I will be monitoring that incredibly closely for the remainder of this entire mission, because without RCS fuel, we're dead in the water. We can't do anything. We've got engines that need ullaging. We need to orient ourselves. It would be terrible if we were to run out. Foreshadowing. Cody Phillips and Thierry Petit are able to complete the longest transposition and docking ever recorded in the history of this space program, thanks to the aforementioned pedal adapter problems, and they are on their way to the moon. All in the right configuration. Everything is back to normal. We have just used half of our RCS fuel to get us somewhere where really we should have only maybe used about a tenth. But just before spending 4 days in space, they do make it to the moon sphere of influence, and thankfully the RL-10s on the CSM do light up. This is still a version of this that does not have them pointed towards the center of mass, so this is incredibly dangerous. I swear a fix is coming at some point. It may not be this episode, and it may not be next episode, but it is going to happen because I do put some value in my Kerbal's life, despite what some may think. Thankfully, this time though, there once again is no issue with the CSM engines firing up. And with the lunar insertion burn completed, we are on to the most important and quite possibly the most challenging part of this mission, landing on the moon within 1 kilometer of one of the target sites. And the target site that I have picked for this particular lunar mission is Hadley Apennine, the landing site of the Apollo 15 mission. And the only reason why we have gone for that rather than, you know, the Apollo 11 mission, which might make sense considering the time that we are landing this, is because it was on the day-night terminator, and I thought it would look quite nice if we landed close to the day-night terminator. And it was also sort of within our inclination. Those were two very, very valid reasons to pick this site. But with the target now picked, Thierry Petit has been moved across to the lander and once again has been given the go-ahead from mission control to undock from the CSM and begin his descent down to the lunar surface, becoming the third Kerbal in our agency's history to step foot on the moon. We're only sending 1 Kerbal down this time rather than the 2 because well, to be quite honest, I didn't do this on a live stream, so I wasn't bullied into sending both Kerbals down at the same time. If the lander fails, at least we only lose 1 Kerbal rather than 2. But Thierry, I have full faith that this mission will work. Okay, so whilst we're going to be attempting this landing, I just want to say, I think someone did calculate the odds of this mission with this design being a flawless success when I was first flying this. And I think, if I recall correctly, it was about 90%. And that's basically taking into consideration all of the engines that we've got, the failure rate of those engines, and yeah, basically, it came to about 90%, which seems like a lot. I mean, that's an A-star grade. However, when you put in someone's life at risk like this, 90% really is quite a worrying number. If, say I had surgery and I was given like, you know, 90% chance that it was going to be successful, I'd look at the surgeon and I'd be like, are you mad? Come on, let's up those numbers a bit. One way that I do have, though, of increasing the chance of success is once that engine has fired up on the lander, if I keep it burning for the entire descent, we only do 1 single burn, means that we don't have to reignite it and, you know, there being a potential chance that it fails. So we are going to do this in 1 single solitary burn all the way down. Also, because of the RCS issue, we do turn off our RCS several times during this descent, but despite all of that, we do get incredibly close to the target. I'm very happy with where it looks like we are aiming, but unfortunately, and I didn't know this at the time, which is why I still spent the 2 days down here, which we will see in a minute, wasn't quite close enough. We were so close, but not close enough. And yeah, that does mean that this mission, we're not going to be able to complete the contract. However, we are still going to get some new science from the Murray Imbrium, because this is a site that we have not landed crew at before, so there is still some benefit to flying this entire, what now seems to be quite cursed mission. With Thierry Petit now safely on the moon's surface, I can't but help myself try and mess around with some of my settings, unfortunately activating one of the ignitions on the lander, completely wasting it. Let's hope that doesn't come back to bite us. Although to be fair, that engine does have 18 ignitions remaining, so I'm sure it will be fine. But after spending 4 days in zero gravity, Thierry Petit is very happy to be on firm ground yet again, and he wastes no time in getting out of the lander and onto the surface of the moon. First things first, he plants down that all-important flag to mark our historical second lunar landing site. Then it's a load of experiments to be run on the surface, and we're actually going to see Thierry Petit a little bit longer on the surface than we did George Edwards and Mr. Blue in the last episode, which was an episode dedicated entirely to a lunar landing. I made that one incredibly cinematic, and yeah, I feel like we missed out on some of the finer details in that video. And actually, this segment of this video, the whole second lunar landing, is 20-ish minutes long. The lunar landing special was 15 minutes long total. So this one part of this video is longer than the entire dedicated video to a lunar landing. Yeah, it's because I went fully cinematic for that, and this one I'm actually showing more of the mission profile. But yeah, we get to see more like this, and I can go into things in a bit more detail. Plus, that mission had no problems whatsoever. We've already had a few for this one, and trust me, we are not over yet. But anyway, we are now going to be waiting around for Thierry's 2-day stay on the moon, because that is part of the contract that we are not going to be able to complete because I didn't land close enough and I didn't realize until the contract didn't fire after I stayed here for 2 days. I really should have noticed that none of the targeted sites were ticked. That probably would have been a big giveaway that this was not going to work. Oh well. But just like that, the wait is over, and we have fired up the engine on the lander, and it is successful, and we are making our way back into orbit, and in typical Kerbal Space Program fashion, the game crashes. But that's okay, because at least it put me back to the point just before I took off, and we can attempt to make this ascent to meet the CSM all over again with no worries. Honestly, everything about this mission that could be going wrong is going wrong. Like right now, we are attempting to get into quite a precise orbit because, you know, we've got to try and match the inclination of the orbiting module as much as possible without using any RCS because I have next to none. I need to save that for docking. I need to save that for ullage for the engine when we want to make that massive inclination change that we're going to have to do because we've been on the surface of the moon for 2 days. This, honestly, was one of the most stressful missions I have ever flown. At least the engine did fire when we were on the surface of the moon, otherwise we would have stranded Thierry down there and he would have died. But we are able to make it up to space using only 1 burn. I mean, it's a lot easier to only use 1 burn when you are ascending rather than descending, and we have plotted out our maneuver to change our inclination to match the orbiting module. And of course, as if fate smiles upon me, when we go to execute the maneuver, the RL-10 has a permanent engine failure. Luckily though, on the orbiting module, we do have an additional 2 engines that are currently completely fine, and we have more than enough fuel to make some drastic inclination changes with this ship, as well as still being able to get back home. What we don't have though is an awful lot of RCS propellant. We do have a rendezvous all plotted out though, and as soon as they are in close contact, we switch over to the lander and actually perform the slowdown burn using the vast majority of the lander's RCS fuel, because that's not going to be needed. We need to keep a tiny amount of it so that we can keep it stable, so that we can dock the CSM to it. But really, yeah, that's just fuel that we can safely burn at the moment. And I mean, it's not like we're ever going to be using its engine again, considering it is dead. Yeah, this is why this mission has taken more time than the entire dedicated moon landing video, because so much went wrong. Normally, when I would get to this stage of a mission, doing the docking, I would let MechJeb auto dock take over for me. However, due to the limits of the RCS that I have on board, I find MechJeb can sometimes overuse your remaining propellant, so we are going to be manually docking this, which isn't the worst thing in the world. I do have docking port alignment indicator, which makes it really easy to dock. It is a slow and gradual process though, and I barely have over 200 liters of helium left in the spacecraft by the time that we actually dock with the lander. So maybe about 1/10 of our RCS fuel fuel in total, and we are still around the moon. Thankfully, the capsule has its own reserves of fuel, which is a different configuration, so we don't have to worry about using that quite yet. And rather than undocking the lander, I have actually decided to keep it with us because we can use some of the lander's fuel to propel us so that we have ullage for our engines to ignite. And thankfully, they do. And even with the lander attached still, we have more than enough Delta V on the CSM to actually get us back to Earth. This CSM is insanely overbuilt. I honestly did not realize I had overbuilt it this much, but it certainly helps when you get yourself into a sticky situation like we find ourselves right now. Although, with this burn being completed, we are pretty much on the home free. Finally, I can breathe a sigh of relief as one of the most cursed missions I have ever flown, at least for a very long time, looks like we are in the all clear. So yeah, that foreshadowing that I mentioned earlier, well, it didn't really lead to anything super drastic, but yeah, the margins for this were so incredibly tight. But we did make it back to Earth. We are currently performing entry, descent, and landing, and hopefully that Gemini heat shield does hold up. I know it will. We have flown many Gemini missions to the moon and back in this series by this point, so I am not worried in the slightest. But eventually we do pull through the re-entry and we are able to open the parachutes and splash down safely in the Pacific Ocean. Lots of science gained, Cody Phillips and Thierry Petit scarred for life, but now it's finally time to turn to the actual mission that this whole video was mainly about: Mars. On the 23rd of September 1969, Shackleton X arrives at Mars. After one of the quickest transfers to Mars I think I've ever achieved. Only 6 months, that's pretty fast. As soon as we arrive, the science starts flooding in, as this does have more capable experiments from the previous missions that we have sent over to the Red Planet. And it's just a quick wait until we reach our closest approach to fire up the engine on the Mars capture stage, putting us into an incredibly elliptical orbit. And this is the exact orbit that is required for this mission, because we have 4 separate things that we are going to be doing here, and I need an orbit that will allow me to transfer them to their final desired destinations. The initial capture burn is successfully completed, and with that we actually release the Mars lander that is sitting on top of this spacecraft. And the reason for this is the lander has the least Delta V, the least fuel out of every single part of this mission, and I need to keep its perihelion as low as possible so that I can fire the engines at apoarian and actually put us within Mars's atmosphere, bringing that lander down. It doesn't really have enough Delta V to get a nice circular orbit, and what we are going to do after releasing that lander is actually more circularize with the rest of the spacecraft. We're firing up that capture stage engine again to put us into a slightly less elliptical orbit, as this will help the other 3 sections of this mission perform their job, that being Phobos landing, Deimos landing, and orbital communications. After completing a couple of burns to both raise our apoaps and then make a drastic inclination change whilst we're in quite high orbit to save on Delta V, we release the 2 moon landers to get them in an ideal orbit for them to transfer to their respective moons. None of the separate landers or parts of this mission actually have any sort of name, and I was just wondering if anyone had a good name idea. Why not leave it in the comments? It'd be quite cool to see what thoughts you guys can come up with for the names of the separate parts of Shackleton X. Anyway, we're not quite done with the capture stage yet, because we are going to perform one final burn to really circularize the orbit of the communications part of this mission in a fairly low Mars orbit, allowing us to have communication with the lander whenever we pass over. It's not going to be constant because we don't have a communications network around Mars yet. That is probably something that we will do at a future date, especially if we are going to want to send crew, but it means that we are close enough to the surface of Mars to actually get a signal off of the lander on the surface, and also hopefully be able to talk to the 2 probes on Phobos and Deimos too. But now with the communication satellite all set up in its final orbit, it is time to turn our focus to the moon landers. I'm going to do the moon landers first because realistically it's going to be a little bit more complicated getting those down rather than the Mars lander, because the Mars lander we just need to dip into the atmosphere. Starting out, we have the Deimos lander, where we have plotted out a maneuver to get us on an impact course with that tiny moon in about 5.5 days. Because we are using basic RCS engines for these probes, I am fairly sure there is no chance of failure. So we don't have anything like that to worry about, and the burn is successfully done, and we do have our impact course. We then turn our attention to the Phobos lander, where we are going to do exactly the same thing. Plot ourselves out a maneuver to get on an impact course, and then burn to achieve it. Now, the reason why I'm going for impact courses with these, because I am playing with Principia. Phobos and Deimos are tiny compared to Mars. I'm not even sure if it is possible to get a stable orbit around these moons. Definitely not Phobos due to its proximity to Mars. Deimos, maybe, but I'd have to try that out. An impact course means I am heading straight for the moon, and I'm going to be able to perform a landing as soon as I get there, not have to worry about getting into orbit. But the burn for Phobos is completed, and we are going to arrive in only a day and a half, which means we're going to get there before the Deimos lander, so we are going to follow this mission to its conclusion, where hopefully it doesn't explode on the surface. But due to how small Phobos is, I don't really think we have any worry of that at all, because we are almost matching Phobos' speed when we approach it. We are coming down very, very, very slowly indeed. Of course, we are going to have to perform a burn to slow ourselves down to avoid anything catastrophic, but I think we're fine here. Now, one thing I really wanted to do for both of these landers was land them in a position where we get some absolutely stunning views of Mars at the point where we have landed. And I hope that you may agree with me, but the point on Phobos that we have hit, well, it looks incredible. Now, unfortunately, our impact course for Deimos isn't going to work, and that is because we are approaching Deimos from behind, as in Mars is behind the rock. And that means we have no way of communicating to our communication satellite in Mars orbit. So before we get ourselves in a very sticky situation, I actually burn slightly out of the way so that we avoid the impact. That way we're just going to fly past it, and then we can correct later on and hopefully try and land on the side of Deimos that we're actually going to be able to talk to. Because yeah, we do lose comms as I fly past, but I am able to plot another maneuver later on that gets us back on target with hopefully a landing. However, it is going to be quite some time off of the other landings, and I'm going to do this out of order because I might as well do the entire Deimos section. But I do get myself into a slightly polar orbit of Deimos, and as you can see by the insane wiggly lines that Principia provides, I really don't think that we are ever going to get a truly stable orbit around this rock. It's just too small and it is too close to Mars. It's just going to be pulled on by Mars, and eventually it will end up crashing into the surface. But that's okay, because we don't plan on orbiting this, we plan on landing. It's going to mean it will be a nightmare if we do ever want to get some ScanSat mappings of these rocks, because it's just not going to be possible. We're not going to be able to keep something in orbit for long enough to map the entire surface. However, once again, with a blisteringly slow descent onto the surface that I eventually do end up using 4x time warp to, we land. And another pretty fantastic view of Mars in the background too. And that brings us on to the fourth and final part of this mission, the Mars landing. Actually landing on the surface of Mars, which, even though I said, you know, it's more complex to get to Phobos and Deimos, Mars itself is tricky because it does have an atmosphere. So we are using parachutes on this lander, but really Mars has such a thin, tenuous atmosphere that they don't do an awful lot. And we do have to try and use some of the propellant on the lander to slow ourselves down before the parachutes deploy, because if we didn't do that, well, the parachutes would rip because they are going too fast and we would all cry back at mission control. Another thing that really helped bleed off speed for this landing as well is I entered the atmosphere twice. The first time I burnt, as you just saw, to try and avoid us falling all the way down to the surface, and the second time, which we are now currently entering again. This is going to be our final descent onto the surface, and even then I still have to use the majority of the fuel on this spacecraft to slow us down to an acceptable point where the parachutes will not get torn to shreds when we open them up. Yeah, the thin atmosphere, it can prove really deadly. Those parachutes, they do open successfully though, and none of them break. But because they are not all that big, we still do need to use pretty much the last of our fuel to get a soft touchdown on the surface. And even then, we are going so fast that, well, we land on our back. Not to worry though, we also happen to have landed on a hill, and using my favourite friend gravity, well, we start rolling down, and after toggling some experiments, the landing gear, and basically trying to do everything that I absolutely can in my power to right this vessel, it does eventually sit the right way up. That was rather concerning, considering all of the solar panels on this lander are on top. If it was upside down, we would get absolutely no power, and this thing would be dead after not very long at all. But there we have it, the end of Shackleton X. All parts of this mission were successful. We have landed on Phobos, Deimos, Mars itself, and we still have communication back to Earth thanks to that satellite in Mars orbit. All around, I would say this has been an incredibly successful mission, and thanks to all 3 probes still being connected, well, we're going to get an awful lot of science back at Earth for this. Meanwhile, during Shackleton X's mission, ZAP II, which was our probe that we sent over to Vesta, did arrive. Now, unfortunately, Principia decided it did not want to play nicely with this craft, and when I switched back to this vessel, the entire craft was shivering like it had been plunged in freezing cold water. Now, previously, when stuff like this has happened, I tend to find using the hack gravity cheat from the cheat menu does sort of kick Principia back into gear. However, trying this didn't really help, and I wasn't able to recover this mission at all. We weren't even able to ignite the engine, so we just fly right past Vesta. Once again, our asteroid missions have been a complete failure. There is a little bit of Space Center catch-up that I want to briefly go over before we launch this next mission. We upgrade the Administration Center so that I can start picking up more programs. The reason why I'm not covering it in detail is because this episode is already 3 episodes in length, and we still have Shackleton XI to launch, once again, on a Pinnacle 2. We've already seen one of these launches this episode. It is exactly the same. The only difference being the payload. We are going to Jupiter, and we are going to Jupiter with the aim of orbiting one of the Jovian moons with the most advanced scientific experiments that we have at our disposal. We did unlock more advanced science earlier on this year, so we are going to absolutely pack this satellite full of them and send it to Jupiter, where hopefully, if we orbit one of those Jovian moons, we are going to get so much science back. We are sending about 1.5 tons worth of total payload to Jupiter, and it will have about 4,100 meters per second of delta V when it arrives there, which I'm fairly confident should be able to get us orbit of somewhere. The mission had a completely flawless launch though, and everything worked up to and including the Trans-Jovian injection, and Shackleton XI is on its way. I am going to have to start thinking of new names for my interplanetary missions because 11 is getting quite ridiculous. I do plan on trying to get the next episode of this out in a couple of weeks' time, but as always, life might get in the way. But after that episode, I'm actually going to have to start filming things again, and it might take a little bit longer. But next time round, we are going to see space stations, we're going to see Saturn, and probably another couple of moon landings. I'd like to give a big thanks to my patrons and members for their continued support. I have been Carnassa, and I will see you later.